All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, How to Secure Real-Time Communications Within a Medical Device Ecosystem Without Compromises. We're excited to have you all here for an insightful discussion on securing real-time data exchange in medical devices without sacrificing performance, compliance, or patient safety. This webinar is co-hosted by RTI and MedCrypt, and we're joined by two expert speakers, Fran Porcel and Mahida. Before we get started, a few quick housekeeping items. The session is being recorded and a link to the recording will be emailed to all registrants after the webinar. We do encourage you to ask questions. You can submit them through the Q&A function and we'll address as many as possible during the session. You're also welcome to engage in the chat or comments or discussion. With that, let's dive in and I'll turn it over to Fran and Om.
Hi,
Hi,
everybody.
everyone. Oh,
Hi,
Fran, go ahead.
sorry. My name is Fran Porcel. I'm a principal application engineer here at RTI. I've been working for RTI for 9 years now, and I have been working 7 of those in the professional services team, where I help train, help debug, and help architect my customer systems around RTI Connect. And I have been focusing the last few years in medtech, helping my medtech customers to achieve FDA approval and also EU approval.
Thanks, Fran, for joining. I'll give a quick intro. My name's Mahida. I'm VP of Product here at MedCrypt. Have spent almost 8 years working with med tech companies, specifically medical device manufacturers, helping secure their devices from varying from things like SBOMs and vulnerability management all the way to securing, doing things like key management and certificate management to secure communications of the devices. I'm excited to be here and talk a little bit more about the topic at hand today around how we can secure communications and deal with some of the challenges we see in the medtech industry.
Would you like
A
to
quick,
do this one?
yeah, a quick agenda for today. We're going to go over some challenges of that security kind of introduces itself in medtech. We'll talk about data and data centricity, about how you have to design the system with both, real requirements like real-time communication, and the challenges that brings, while also needing to think about security, especially due to a lot of the regulatory changes in the past couple of years. Then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the solutions that both RTI and MedCrypt provide, and translate that into a case study, right? Give you a real life example of what that looks like, what threats look like, and how the RTI and MedCrypt solutions help you mitigate those. And then we'll summarize the call with some key takeaways and then open the floor for Q&A. Feel free to send your Q&A questions in the chat, and we'll answer them if they're relevant during the conversation, but likely save them for the end. So some of the challenges of security in connected medtech environments, you oftentimes have things like needing to actually deal with like real-time performance, right, requirements, or making sure the system's able to achieve clinical the clinical functionality, right, that the device is trying to do. But I wanted to take a little bit different a different view on it. What's really changed in the past couple of decades is how the regulatory landscape has evolved. The FDA, for example, has evolved more and more quickly in recognizing the need for cybersecurity in medical devices. And in addition to the pre-market and post-market guidances that have come out and the updates that have come out over the past decade, there's also been other regulatory changes from things like executive orders from the White House, as well as laws being passed to actually give the FDA the authority to enforce cybersecurity. Now, one could, like I have, spend an afternoon or a weekend going through all the guidances, right, with a highlighter and trying to understand hundreds of pages of what those cybersecurity requirements actually mean. We've distilled some of them into a few key control categories. So when we talk about the cybersecurity requirements that are being pushed by regulatory agencies like the FDA and others around the world, at least when it comes to data communication and device communication, what we really mean is talking about securing data at rest and in transit, right? Making sure when you're sending data between different components of the system, both internal to the medical device, but to also external endpoints, that data is encrypted. There's authentication of each endpoint, right? Not just the server, but there's mutual authentication. Um, and you're really trying to ensure this integrity of that data. Um, One of the key things you don't want to do is have your data go in plain text because that can make it, that can make it easier for anyone to do a man in the middle, right? Look at the control data or even patient data that's being transmitted. And also you don't want to, um, while it's kind of easy to encrypt data, you could say, oh, I'm going to use a key or a certificate. I'm going to sign the data. One of the most common mistakes we see in the industry is the reuse of keys and certificates across a fleet of devices. What you really want to do is really control, um, you know, kind of create a boundary of making sure each device and even maybe each type of service has its own unique key, right? That ensures common security issues like, hey, a hacker getting access to one device, being able to read the cryptography key off the device isn't able to compromise your entire fleet of devices. So when we talk about things like authentic cybersecurity and the regulatory requirements, what we really want to do is make sure things like authentication, data integrity, the cryptography we're actually using, right, is all following best practices. Now, in order to do all that, when we're talking about actual medical devices, especially ones with real-time constraints and requirements, it's really hard to do, right? This diagram is just an example of one device that has a lot of different things happening. Right? Most medical devices, especially the complex ones, things like surgical robots or MRI machines, are not just one computer, right, doing a bunch of operations. They're usually made up of 5 to 10, sometimes 20 plus computing systems talking, communicating to each other, relaying back information to users, right, to clinical staff. And all that introduces a lot of complexity just from a computational perspective and also from a timing, performance, reliability perspective. And then so when we add on things like, hey, in addition to meeting all those requirements, you need to also make sure you're doing cybersecurity and making sure you're doing things like not transmitting your data in plain text. You have unique keys at each endpoint. It really, really makes the problem really difficult to solve, right? Especially when most device manufacturers, right, when you're on the R&D team, your main goal is to get the clinical functionality working, right? You really want to, help patients. You really want to make sure your device has that clinical functionality. You can take that to market. And so all these requirements, right, can be really, really overbearing and complex for engineers to really solve for all at once.
Yeah, so I wanted to introduce, thank you all for that introduction to the problem. I wanted to introduce data centricity as a new approach to solve that problem that was just presenting. We can think of data centricity as a bridge between the data interoperability and the system. At the end of the day, the foundation of any distributed system like the one that On was presenting or any modern medtech device, we need the foundation to be the connectivity because all these applications rely on that data sharing across all the systems. You're going to need the right data uh, being delivered to the right place at the right time. And these intelligent systems need to be able to communicate with each other and depend a lot on the real-time data flow. And data centricity as a change of paradigm compared to the connection-oriented problem or diagram that shared earlier, data centricity focuses on your data. If you make everything about your data, securing the system is going to be easier instead of trying to secure every single connection that you have in your device. Now, we can see data centricity as the single source of truth. We can have a shared data space for intelligent systems where applications can come in, join the communication, and communicate with each other in a very efficient way. They know that they were also enabling the AI by having the data being delivered, have it be training data or the output of that AI. Where with data centricity, we're removing the different silos and we're allowing on-demand access, and everything is able to connect with real-time speed. It's also very important that a data-centric system is decentralized and it is very flexible because applications can communicate directly with each other without going through any sort of broker, which introduces a single point of failure. Now, RTI Connect is an implementation of a data-centric secure system. Now, as I mentioned, this is decentralized. RTI Connect is actually an implementation of the data distribution service standard, which is managed by the object management group, and it is focused on resilient communications. By making everything about your data, by being data centric, you are able to achieve very fine-grained access control for your data in motion, and it is designed to protect the untrusted network. Now, let's take a look very quickly on what's going on under the hood. If we think of a network stack where we have the network layer at the bottom and your application on the top, where does Connex fit in? Connex will be this portion here. You can see here we have at the very bottom, we have Ethernet, IP, then UDP, TCP, or any of the secure transports. We also see coming up more recently, TSN is becoming more and more popular. Or if you want to avoid the network altogether and have communication within your device, you can use shared memory. But how does your application interface with the network? That's going to be thanks to RTI Connect, which is an implementation, as I mentioned, of a DDS standard, which is actually a family of standards, including RTPS, the different API implementations. You can use Connect by using C++ or Python or Java, even C, or also C#. And what your applications need to care of at the end of the day is to just call a send API, send operation, and on the other side, the receive operation, making things very simple. Why are they so simple? Because Connex is going to take care of the discovery of all of your applications automatically. As soon as your application starts, it's able to automatically discover each other. You don't need to worry about IP addresses, what kind of network I'm in. Am I using UDP? Am I using TCP? Connex is taking care of all of that for you. And in addition to that, Connex has a wide variety of quality of service configurations so that you can decide how reliable you want your data streams to be, or if you want the data that you had originally sent to be provided to late joining applications. And of course, very important here, we have DDS security. With security, you're going to be able to secure your system. You could choose to use DTLS or TLS, or you can introduce security and more fine-grained, even over a transport that is not secure over UDP by securing this portion. This is the wire protocol standard within DDS. You're going to be able to very simply, with some QoS policy changes, be able to secure the whole system with just some configurations and some certificates, obviously. Now, I want to introduce as well the security plugins. Now, you can use Connect without security if you want to while you're developing early on, and then introduce security. We recommend you to, if you're using Connect, to start evaluating security as soon as possible if it is in your horizon, so that you get used to how the system is going to work under those circumstances. But again, if we think of the network stack with the transport at the bottom of your application on the top, Connect enables you to use the security extensions, which is a set of configurable built-in plugins that allow you to use authentication, access control, cryptography, or logging for your system. Very important also is that Connect abstracts also the operating system layer, and it makes your applications very transport agnostic and cross-platform. You don't need to worry about what operating system your own Connect is already supporting it. And in addition to the security extensions that enable or allow you to use these features, we also provide you with a source code, that is the SDK, so that you can create your own crypto integration or add your custom login and of what's going on in the system, the security monitoring. With Connect, you can very easily see if there is a new threat in the system and what that threat is trying to do, which is very important for reporting purposes and for your system to react if you need to. Maybe you can just understand that or learn that a new threat came into the system, your system continues operating normally, or maybe you want a fault to be thrown very quickly so that the system can shut down and avoid any breach of security. All of that can be enabled with Connex. And of course, obviously, Connex is not doing this on its own. It enables an SSL engine, which is going to depend on the certificates that you provide, which you could do manually, but we always recommend our customers to use a public key infrastructure, and that is what is going to discuss next.
Thanks, Fran, for covering a lot of what DDS and DDS Connects is and how users, when we're talking about that really complex use case of real-time, when there's real-time requirements, right, for data communication and complex systems, how DDS can really solve for that. And thanks for that segue into MedCrypt Guardian. Wanted to talk a bit more about, in order to actually, feed the keys and manage certificates, right? It's really, what we sometimes see is users kind of going for homegrown PKI solutions. And so what we came up at MedCrypt is to build a suite of products that allow users to scale device provisioning and PKI operations without having to kind of roll their own PKI. We've been working closely with device manufacturers to design this product to work in kind of edge cases we see in this industry. Things like you have a device that's that has connectivity, right, to the cloud or to some remote server, but most of the time, right, most hospitals don't really turn that on, right? So you dealt with this edge case of how do you deal with a device that's either completely disconnected or has intermittent connectivity once a month or once a year. So when you're dealing with PKI systems, right, those are really important use cases to solve for, and that's what utilizing our solution really allows you to do out of the box. In addition to that, something earlier I mentioned, right, something you want to avoid is having one key be used for multiple operations or used on across multiple devices. And the way the Guardian platform is designed, it allows for asymmetric key generation on a device, and that private key never leaves the device. Allows you to at scale, generate unique keys, right, without really having to worry about how do you do that in a way that can scale across not just one device but your fleet of devices long term. And then this is a really good use case of something we've seen when working close with device manufacturers where they, I think, Fran, you also mentioned oftentimes you want to really get into the design phase, right? The design development phase when you're trying to really think about security. While it's possible to bolt on security later, you often have to make compromises, right, about what those separate solutions look like. So we work really closely with device manufacturers to integrate Guardian in that design and development phase, and then provide you the means to deal with the edge cases when it comes to manufacturing, right? Oftentimes you're not manufacturing things in-house. You have a third-party manufacturing site that has its own requirements for connectivity, what's allowed within their the manufacturing site, any controls they have, security controls they have, and oftentimes it's additional work for the R&D team to kind of have to deal with that. And so, working with us, we've dealt with that on a lot of different cases. So we work closely with device manufacturers and their manufacturing partners to be able to provision keys on the device in the manufacturing environment. Things you don't want to do is get the manufacturing complete of the device and then go try to generate a key on the device either in the field, right, which makes there's a lot of security risk in that, or an operational risk in that, or some of these other edge cases we see. And so overall, right, utilizing the Guardian platform, we really allow users to enable mutual authentication between devices, do things like have unique keys for not just unique keys on each device, but we often push for unique keys for each operation or function, right, that you're trying to enable.
It's a very important comment that you said there, to include security and Guardian very early on during the design phase. I feel that some of the customers that I work with, they include security later on once the design is more locked in. And security is very important, not just because of the FDA says so, but because security also ensures patient safety. And you don't want to leave that for later. You want to include
Mm.
that as soon as possible because that's going to give you, and you're going to be able to have more informed decisions on what the system needs to look like later on.
Yeah, that's a great point because it also, right, security also unlocks a lot of features and capabilities some people don't always think about right away. Right. So one of the things that we've really seen a shift in medical devices is as they're becoming more connected, the ask from like a business and a business perspective is, hey, can we add functionality later? Right. And so now remote updates come into play. And like, how do you do a remote update while a device is in the field? Right. The old-fashioned way is to go carry around a USB stick, right? Send representatives in the field and tell them to go update it. That's expensive at scale. Right. But more and more device manufacturers, when they're doing next-gen devices, are now thinking about, hey, let's figure out a way to do secure updates in the field, right, without having that in-person representative required. Well, let's always use it. There's always like a fail-safe, right, backup option of sending someone in the field. Right. In order to do remote updates, you need to make sure security is really thought of, right? You wouldn't want any person being able to update your device. You want some security controls in place, and in order to do that, you really need to be thinking about security and key management in the design and development phase.
Yep, that's a really great point.
So when it comes to a joint solution, right? Like I mentioned earlier, Guardian helps you to generate unique cryptographic identities on the device itself, right? It enables things like secure key generation, authentication, data encryption. And so when you're taking the MetCrypt solution and then the RTI solution, you're able to ensure things like, Fran, I think maybe the next, I think there might be a transition on this slide. Yeah. Um, it really ensures things like, allowing you to meet those real-time requirements while taking a zero trust approach to it, right, for that data in motion. And so we go from when I kind of have that slide and table of 5 different cybersecurity requirements you need to meet, mixed in with those real-time performance requirements, right, utilizing both the RTI and Metrop solution allows you to meet all those requirements. You get to protect data in transit. You get secure communication between devices and applications, and then you can also monitor all that information, right, through some of the logging that Fran talked about.
Yeah, I really like this slide because it really exemplifies how MedCrypt and RTI collaborate together in a real system where, you have connects, as I mentioned, it helps your applications communicate, a communication platform, but that platform needs some inputs. It's not just sending your data. One of those inputs is an SSL engine and also your certificates. And, you could manually go ahead and create your certificates, but I would much rather let MedCrypt's Guardian do it for me because it's gonna make it so much simpler. But that's also an input to your Connect Secure application that is going to ensure that this Connect's data bus that allows your applications to communicate is very secure and can ensure your cybersecurity requirements and your safety requirements. Now, we have a case study that and I are going to discuss. So, maybe we can do a little exercise, you and I. I will ask you here a couple of questions. Um, we have here 3 different topics. This is a detailed DDS security threat model. We're going to see a real life example, which I think is going to be super useful for our audience. We have it here in this device. This could be different size of the network, or different hosts on the network, could all be on the same host. Good things that with Connects, that doesn't really matter. This is a global sharing data space, a Connects data bus, where the applications can communicate whether they're on the same device or on different devices. But we have 3 different topics. We have the video topic. We probably have a camera that is sending video and probably have some sort of AI consuming that video, making decisions, or maybe we just have the surgeon looking at a screen, doing some procedure. We have the patient vitals that are really important to be reported very timely. And we have an arm control topic that is ensuring that the movement of a robotic arm is the way it needs to be. Now, let's introduce here a couple of concepts. We have different boundaries in the system. This is going to be our domain trust boundary, and it's going to protect the data within this domain thanks to domain outsider mitigations. And we also have topic trust boundaries, and these are more specific to each topic. These are going to help protect topic data using outsider mitigations and insider mitigations. So what we're going to do now is to exemplify a few different threats or attacks that can happen in a system. Let's imagine here we have a new attack and it's a malicious device injecting data. Now, what type of mitigation do you think we should apply here to protect ourselves from this attack?
So one, I mean, so in terms of uh, this sounds like a man in the middle, right? Like someone's trying to inject data in an existing, like they're able to maybe pull up Wireshark, see the data going back and forth, and then they're like, okay, we can maybe inject some data packets here to try to do a man in the middle, right?
That's
So I
right.
mean, something that comes to mind, and thinking years ago is, if you have a secure connection, right, one that's using mutually authenticated endpoints. Um, right? Each endpoint is verifying, right? It's signing data, right, as it sends it, and then the other endpoint is verifying data as it receives it. If anyone tampers with that, right, from a cryptography perspective, the signature verification will fail, right? And so you could have protections on each endpoint that says, this is kind of the procedure to follow when a signature fails, right? And you make sure each set of data sent back and forth, right, is being verified.
That's right. Exactly. And in this case, we're going to use domain outsider protection that is going to help mitigate those attacks that are initiated by a domain outsider. In this case, domain outsider, what that means is that it is not any of the original applications that was part of this domain. Perfect. Now, attack number two, we're going to have now a network insider attempting to steal patient vitals data. Now, what do you think of this one, Om?
So I guess in this case, maybe one of these like sub applications is compromised, and someone just has the ability to, you know, try to listen in or send data on the data bus. I mean, in this case, right, right, the way the trust boundaries work, the topic trust boundaries work, right, each subscriber is kind of, has a set of permissions that if they're allowed to read or write, right, certain data that's on the data bus. So it's in this case of attacker number two doesn't have the permissions to actually read the patient vitals. They'll just be rejected, right? Or it'll be a non-authorized action.
That's right. In this case, we're going to use topic outsider protection to make sure that an application that was part of the communication can't suddenly go ahead and subscribe to those patient vitals and try to steal that patient data. Like for example, in this case, it could be something like the video application that was a publishing application that was publishing video can suddenly go ahead and create a subscriber for patient vitals. Perfect. Now, attack number three, we have now a compromised ARM controller that is suddenly creating a publisher to send shutdown commands. What do you think of this one?
I think the example I was talking about earlier, maybe this is the case, right, where the ARM control is now compromised. I mean, in this case, it's like kind of right. Some of the protections that in play here are not just like read protections, like attack number two, but there's also write protections, kind of where someone's trying to send false data, right, or inject some data packets when they don't really have the permissions to do so.
Exactly. In this case, we have an application that had nothing to do with um, sending this type of command to shut down the whole system. Suddenly, it's trying to create a publisher to try and do that. Now, this is very important, right? This exercise that we did here, because when you're in the design phase and you're trying to decide what kind of protection you want to apply to your system, whether it is domain outsider, topic outsider, topic insider protection, this identification of the types of mitigation is what's going to drive the decisions onto what type of quality of service, what certificates you're going to need to include in your deployment to ensure that you're protected against any of the threats that you have identified. And we have a webinar on March 19th, correct?
Mhm.
And we're going to discuss a lot of those technical details a bit more in depth than in today's webinar. Now, let's dissect that first attack a bit more. We're going to see what the implications of that attack, what type of vulnerabilities they're trying to exploit, and how Connect and Guardian help mitigate that. So, in that first scenario that we saw, we had a malicious device attack. Like, for example, an outside application that wasn't part of the original communication is trying to sniff or inject system data. If we think of Stride as one of the very popular models for vulnerabilities, what that application is trying to do is to steal that data. It is trying to impersonate a legitimate system component, and it's also trying to tamper the data because it is injecting new data that is false into the system. Now, how do we mitigate that with Connex? As we mentioned, we're going to apply domain outsider protection to all system data. So the way we're translating spoofing and tampering in this case is by authenticating all of the applications that are authorized to participate in the communication using DDoS security identity certificate. And we're also going to sign, we could also encrypt the data, and we can it's funny because I'm using a lot of words here, but then the way this translates to actual Connect configuration is just you putting the word sign or encrypting your configuration, and Connect takes care of the rest. But it is important to know the concepts. And by signing, Connect is going to automatically add a message authentication code to all the communication to prevent unauthorized applications from interpreting or injecting data.
And the way that Guardian fits into this, right? In order for Connects to authenticate and to encrypt and sign data, right? There needs to be some keys and certificates fed into Connects. And so what Guardian brings is those keys and certificates. And it by making sure you're following some of the best practices that Guardian kind of allows you to configure for, which is things like unique keys, right, per device, but also per application or service. And doing that at scale, right, it really reduces that risk of unauthorized access while automating taking care of all this key and certificate management, right? Because all that stuff, ends up being sometimes an afterthought. It's like, oh, okay, I got to work on my machine, right? Like, how to actually scale this in the field, and then ends up being a kind of pet project for a lot of teams.
I think that scalability is one of the keys for Guardian, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I don't only see scalability as I'm trying to mass produce my device and deploy it in a bunch of different hospitals. Within a single system, scalability is very important too, because every single application, as you said earlier, not just the devices within your system, but every single application within each of those devices should use a different key. And you definitely don't want to do that on your own. You want to rely on something like what Guardian provides, right? Something that is more automated that allows for that scalability. Okay. So when we think about different communication interfaces and cybersecurity risks, you need to think of what are the assets that you're trying to protect, what are the communication channels, what are the possible threats, and by doing that exercise, you will figure out and realize your threat model and how you need to protect yourself. Would you like to continue with this next few slides?
Yeah, so to kind of help summarize a case study, right, we're kind of talked about how RTI Connects and Guardian work together, right, and kind of going back to earlier in the talk, right, some of those challenges we see where you have increased cybersecurity threats, you also have regulatory pressure, right, to make sure you're doing things like secure by design, you have strong authentication authorization controls, you have data integrity and confidentiality built into your design of your device. The risk that's been introduced is that while you could, before we used to talk about there's kind of business risk, right? Being in the market, your device potentially getting hacked, patient data being lost, or compromised, and then having to kind of do things like do recalls of devices, which we've seen sometimes. But now you also have a really big risk in the go-to-market of a medical device where failure to comply with those cybersecurity requirements can lead to delays, right, and business impacts, and patient safety. And so it's really important, like Fran's been really echoing a lot, to think about cybersecurity from the design and development phase of your medical device, because the last thing you want to do is, as you're really getting close to submission to a regulatory agency or go to market, is have to add on a bunch of new work and potentially sometimes redesign aspects of your system. As a small data point, right? We've seen on average of 15 deficiencies per FDA notice, right? And that's a lot, right? For those who are familiar with notices and the number of deficiencies, right? And those are just the cybersecurity specific ones, and that's a significant change over the past couple of years, where now you have regulatory agencies really paying attention to cybersecurity.
I think that that's why it's so important to take it very seriously early on, right?
Mhm.
And we have been talking about Guardian, but I know that MedCrypt also has consultation sort of services that can help guide you through this. It's not, and same thing with RTI, right? I work in the professional services team, so we help our customers navigate all of that. We not only provide the products that you can go ahead and use and then leave you out to dry. No, we're going to help you navigate all of that and how to use the products the right way. And then we saw how MedCrypt's Guardian and RTI Connect's interface together, right? We have Guardian uh, providing those certificates in a very seamless manner, in a very scalable way, to the point where you can include it in your system. You don't need to worry about how each of those operations are made. But the thing that you need to know is how to configure it. The output of that is going to be a set of certificates that are going to be used as an input for RTI Connect security. And that is going to help your applications be able to communicate again in a real-time fashion with very low latency, very high throughput, but also in a secure manner to be compliant with FDA guidance. Anything you wanted to comment on this slide? Oh,
No, I think you did a great job summarizing it.
would you like to go ahead with this one?
Yeah, so I mean, again, we're really echoing, right? One of the most important things and critical things to a device manufacturer is FDA compliance and regulatory compliance. So it's really important to, when you're designing and developing your device, is to take into frameworks like the Secure Product Development Framework, align it with FDA guidelines, and address potential issues, right, proactively. Because the more you do, right, kind of what we talk a lot about shifting left in cybersecurity, and it's really, really important in medtech, because the more usually at the time of submission, right, it's cram time. You're trying to get your documents and processes right all in order. But when you've done all the hard work of actually getting your clinical device to function and work, but the last thing you want is a truckload of new issues, right, to and requirements to solve for. So it's really, really important to shift left. Think of cybersecurity from day one of that design of that development of that medical device. And you kind of have multiple things at play. You have business requirements, kind of risk, right, in terms of making sure you want to minimize things like security issues when the device is in the field. You have regulatory requirements, right? And all of those are really working towards ensuring and enhancing patient safety. Right? The cybersecurity, while it kind of ends up being a lot around, protecting against hackers and things like that, also introduces things to kind of improve system integrity. Right? When we're talking about more like cryptography specific and terms like signing and verifying data, what that's really doing is making sure the integrity of that data, right, is not compromised. So it's really, really important to introduce concepts like that in the design of your device. And doing all this allows robust security across life cycles, both from a pre-market, post-market perspective, as well as allows you to scale in a much easier fashion, right? If you take shortcuts with cybersecurity early on, right, it might not be a problem for your first 10 devices, first 20 devices in the market, but it will, bring exponential like set of challenges when you go to 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 devices, and it's much harder to fix those problems later in that life cycle.
Yeah, to echo Om's comments on, my job as a consultant of RTI Connect, I have to many times put out fires, and I put out some fires I like to, if I need to put out a fire early on the development, my customers definitely don't want to have to put out a fire when they're close to that FDA submission, and definitely not on the field, right? A big job of a firefighter is not only to put out the fires, but also do fire prevention. How do you do that fire prevention? You do that during the design phase by making sure that you're using the right technologies and you partner with the right companies to make sure that later on the system is going to work the way it's supposed to work, and it can only do so if you have cybersecurity in mind from the beginning. And I think that we have enough time for Q&A. Is that right, Stacy?
Yes, we do. We don't have any questions in the poll. If you have any questions, please enter them now.
Cool. While we wait for some questions to be sent or shared, Fran, question for you, right? You said you work a lot with device manufacturers, right, through the professional services. What do you see when you see customers trying to do this themselves? Like, are people, like throwing together, their own PKI using OpenSSL? Or are they using some other tool or service? Like, what's kind of the standard you've seen when people are trying to do this DIY?
That's a good question. And I just realized that we have here a cool slide as a backup where we can see a bit of the technicalities, right? And we're going to talk more about this on the webinar on March 19th. But you can see here a system, right? You have a distributed system with multiple participants communicating with each other. But as you can see, each of them has a number of inputs that go into it. Assigned permissions file, you have an identity certificate, you have a private key. Now, when you're developing a system, especially when you're evaluating, right? You're trying to figure out, okay, what is the right technology for me? I want to use RTI Connects. I want to use, socket communication that I want to build in-house. What do I need to include here? When you're doing that, it is normal to practice and to check, okay, maybe I can use OpenSSL for this and do everything on my own. So I'm going to go ahead and generate the keys and the certificates. I'm going to call the OpenSSL commands on my own, which I have done myself, and it's super tedious because I end up copy pasting something from somewhere else, which is not even a good practice, but that's the way to do it because those commands are really long and the output of that is really hard to understand too. So I have seen customers try to do that themselves, right? And I have also seen customers saying, well, I was able to do it during development. I could just apply it and mass produce my devices like this. And that's not a good idea at all because it's going to be really hard to do that on your own. What do you think, Om?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's one of the things that, having an engineering background, right? It's easy to be like, I can do this myself, right? But the problem is you end up having band-aid solutions, right? Temporary solutions that kind of work in the short term, but lead to headaches later. And it's really important to kind of make sure, I think people really understand that because this is really difficult to do at scale.
That's a good point. And we have an engineering background, so let's just do it on our own. But when I joined RTI and I became a professional services engineer and kind of a consultant, right? I kind of complain, oh, all my customers should include me earlier on because I have realized how important it is to partner with the right people. And before RTI, I would do something in my house. I want to repair something, I could do it on my own. But then I realized, okay, I should definitely call the expert that knows how to do this. And that is what MedCrypt and RTI can help you with.
It's kind of two things you don't mess with in your house, right? You try to avoid DIY, which is plumbing and any like electrical work. And this kind of touches into the plumbing aspect of it.
Absolutely. How are we doing on time, Stacy?
We have time. Any other questions for Fran and Om? All right. Well, in follow-up to this meeting, if you do have any questions, you can email Fran or Om. I think on the next slide, they have their information. And we will, as Om and Fran mentioned, have a follow-up RTI MedCrypt webinar coming up soon, and it will include more of the technical details.
Absolutely. Feel free to reach out. Something that I do myself, I've done it with some MedCrypt webinars as well, where I cannot make it. I sign up, but I cannot make it at the time of the webinar, and then I can watch the recording. So if you're watching the recording, feel free to reach out to myself, fran@rti.com, or to alm@netcrit.co, and we'll be sure to answer your questions.
Well, thank you both so much for this very interesting topic, and we look forward to seeing you in future webinars. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, everybody.